Okay guys, so you may have seen this review I did where I reviewed an arc of Victoria Aveyard's newest one, Realmbreaker. And the video was Realmbreaker Broke Me because that book was not good and I had a lot of high expectations for it. So when I heard that Brigid Kemmerer, who is the author of one of my favorite Beauty and the Beast retellings on the YA side, was starting a new series that seemed to be a little bit more, I don't want to say traditionally fantasy, but it just struck me as another author I really like is doing this like questy fantasy book, and I just didn't have it in my heart to be disappointed again. So it is with great pleasure that I can tell you that Defy the Night by Brigid Kemmerer, coming soon to shelves near you, is not a disappointment. Thank you. First, I would like to say that I did get this arc from NetGalley and the publisher for my fair and honest review. And I would like to thank them for that because Brigid Kemmerer is an author who the last time I was at BEA, she was there signing, and the day that I went there, I'm using dozens of authors throughout that day, but the day that I went there, I wore specifically my Beauty and the Beast shirt because I was so excited to meet her and have my book signed by her and just tell her how excited those books made me. So again, there's a lot riding on this new book. I also feel like the topic of this book is a little bit maybe too much too soon for people, but give it a chance. So in the kingdom of Kandala, may also be Kandala, but I saw the word and saw mandala with like a K instead of an M, so it's Kandala to me. In this kingdom, there is a plague going on and it can only be stopped by a certain type of plant. Now, Kandala has a number of other like consulates that are ruled over by the king, and unfortunately this plant that can help cure or combat this plague is only found in really like 2 of them. So there's a lot of really interesting political stuff right off the bat about these people who, yes, it's terrible, people are dying, but there's, some money-making politics going on. Also, something that happened right before this plague started attacking this kingdom was the previous king and queen, who were well beloved. They, were very kind and generous. They were assassinated by one of the consulates. And their young son, Harriston, had to take over along with his brother, Corrick, who stepped into the role as King's Justice. Now, Harriston and Carrick made a decision. They said, our parents were loved, but they were assassinated. And so between that and the plague that set in and the riots, the ruckus that caused, they said it is better to be feared than to be loved. So they're not exactly the kingdom's favorite people, but they're doing the best they can. So again, just as a really interesting extra layer of politics on that end. And then you have the character of Corrick in particular. Harriston was a sickly child, and there are threats throughout the book that Harriston may actually have the plague. And so Corrick is really focused on supporting his brother, trying to help him not die, but also being the King's Justice means that he really is the person who is meting out the punishments, the justice that are making him and Harriston so feared. So he's done some pretty rough things in his young life, and he obviously has been very affected by those. So in a nutshell, that's one corner of this kingdom. And then off in the wilds, which is a part where, peasants and the poor people live, is an apothecary named Tessa. Tessa's parents were killed by the king's men because they were part of a black market chain trying to get people who are very poor some shipments of this life-saving plant, since of course it's available if you can purchase it, but if you're poor and you can't purchase enough, you die. So her parents were trying to help people. They were found out, they were killed, And Tessa is now doing that in secret, carrying on their work by night with her friend named Wes. Wes and her have never seen each other's faces, but they have really bonded over their, you know, potentially death experiences every single night, and the people that they've held, and the mothers, the fathers, the children they've tried to save, that they failed to save, the people they've had to comfort. It's a lot. But of course, Tessa does not like Hairston and Corrick, because they're the reason her parents are dead, and they're the reason that the people who are around her are suffering, because their system does not allow enough people to get enough of this drug. Of course, Hairston and Corrick are trying to get enough of the drug from the councils. They don't want to give it to them without charging them an obscene amount of money. So there are two sides to this story, and I think that this book does a really, really good job of showing you that. Probably the biggest strength of this book is the political discussion. So if you're someone like Michaela, who is not a fan of like the political machinations in your fantasy, this might not be for you. There were even parts, I will say, where I was like, maybe I'll just skim a little bit because we're kind of just philosophizing here and I'm not super interested. But this book is very committed to the idea that Corrick has done terrible things. He's not a terrible person, but it's all gray. And Hairston is doing his best, but he doesn't make all the right decisions, and he's terribly morally gray. And then Tessa, who I think is really set up to be, you know, the virtuous, moralistic female, which was really driving me crazy, who feels like, you know, she has the high moral ground to stand on, when she ends up being in discussions with other characters on the other side towards like the middle and end of the book, realizes that maybe her side of the story isn't, again, it's not black and white, it's all gray, and the situation is all gray, and there are people doing things for dumb reasons while people are dying. And I just really enjoyed it. I found it very interesting, and it just added a whole other layer to this that wasn't a story that I feel like could have been very easily the king and his brother are just aristocrats who don't understand the people and they're making bad decisions, but Tessa is, you know, from the people and she is there to like change their hearts and whatever. And that's not where this story goes, and I think that's the strength of it. I also think that that ties into the characters as well. You wouldn't be interested in this discussion if you weren't interested in the characters. I have some issues with Hairston. He was kind of off to the side a little bit. I found Corrick really, really interesting. I think he's probably the most interesting character because of what he has been forced to do and endure, and what he believes is right sometimes has a very violent solution, but he's tortured by it, and he's just always trying to make the right choice, but it sometimes has terrible consequences for him or other people. Tessa, like I said, started out, I felt like she was going to be very moralistic, like the virtuous, you know, person of the people coming in. But once you get to the middle, when her positions start to get murkier, I found her again much more interesting and understood why she had been set up that way. But you might have to give her a little bit of time not to drive you crazy, because it's not that bad, but I was like, oh no, everything else is so good. Why is this like this? So I also really cared about the character of Wes, and this became very, very important, but unfortunately it's a massive spoiler that while it does happen kind of early in the book, I can't tell you. But I did get to a point where I was literally just like, like desperately just like, please do not hurt me in this way. And I'm not going to tell you whether or not the book hurt me because again, it's a spoiler, but it definitely in a short period of time, some of these characters really got their hooks into me, which made some of the longer moralizing or philosophizing easier to get to because it was just like, I think one of the really interesting things is that once you hit the end, and again, I'm not spoiling anything, but once you hit the end, I'm not entirely sure where the story is going to go, because it has created so many gray spaces where, you know, there's the money grubbing nobles, the altruistic nobles, there's the altruistic peasants, and the peasants who are armed resistance, and then there's, you know, there's just so many layers to all of the people, and there's a suggestion that potentially there's going to be some other countries involved in the next one. I really enjoy not necessarily having a firm grasp of exactly where this plot would go moving forward, because there are a lot of moving pieces, and sometimes I get bored with series and I don't want to finish them because I'm like, I mean, this is gonna happen and they're gonna get together and blah blah blah, and you're like, okay, I don't even need to read the last book because I've basically got it all figured out. And I mean, particularly unfortunately in YA, for me, I'm rarely ever wrong. But I think one of the best things I can say about this book as a positive for me is I don't have that clear sensation. Like, I know what the issue is and I know what needs to be resolved, but I don't necessarily know how all of the players are going to react. And I love that. I love that uncertainty, and it makes me just really interested to continue this series. I should say that, lest you think it's all like rah, 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 this is full of action. There, like I said, some of the stuff Court gets into, it's kind of bloody, it's kind of violent. There are armed uprisings, there are explosions. There are a lot of people fighting for their right to survive in every way they know how. And it's not a book that is just filled with talking. I would say on the side of YA, it's probably on the bloodier side. I don't want to say graphic because that feels wrong, but there is definitely, you know, some violence in this. So if that's not up your alley and you weren't already put off by me saying plague, which in the time of COVID-19 feels there, I definitely can see some people just being like, I'm gonna put this on my to be read list, but I can't read this right now, because there were times when the conversation felt a little bit too real. There's like a lot. This is a plague here and a plague there. It's just, so if you don't like politics in your fantasy, if you don't want it to have a plague in it, maybe this isn't for you. But otherwise, I really recommend this book. I think that it's very nuanced, it's very interesting, it's action-packed. I love the characters, and I'm very, very interested to see where this world goes. So it's not like 5-star book for me, but it's like a 4.25, I feel, because I was just invested and I didn't even realize it is not a short book. It's 300 to 400 pages, and I did not realize that I was going to read it all in one sitting. So I enjoyed it, I recommend it, and I'm just so happy that Brigid Kemmerer did not disappoint me. That's just feels like a weight off my shoulders, to be honest with you. Thank you so much for watching this review. Again, this is an ARC review, so it's not quite out. Maybe it will be by the time you watch this, but go, you know, request it from your local bookstore, request it from your local library, and then come back and tell me what you think, or we can just scream about how we have to wait now for the next book. Thanks, guys. Bye.